Well, hello again. Today there's a fair bit of footage. Started out trying to work on trying to transport the tractor. So if you recall, the trailer that I had started working on restoring was a trade from a friend in exchange for taking the tractor over to his place and helping him with some cleanup and demolishing. And we were supposed to go over to do that in the springtime, but then we had a wedding plans that got in the way, and we had a spare room trailer get in the way. And as you can see here, the day's not starting out so well. The ramp slipped out of Emily's hands, and I wasn't expecting for it to be pulled by gravity so suddenly, and it slipped out of my hands as a result. Landed right on my foot, and it's not a huge ramp, but it's big enough that that definitely smarted. You'll see me limping for, well, the rest of the footage. It did not break the bone, although there was a little while where we actually were pretty concerned that it might have. So, some days you live and you learn. Times like that, I kind of regret not having steel-toed shoes. I feel I have a pair of just regular tennis shoes at the moment as my normal everyday use shoes, and for the last few years I've had steel-toed shoes or boots of some form as my everyday shoes, but I just don't at the moment because I haven't replaced a pair yet. However, in all fairness, the steel toe would actually not have done any good. It landed on the tarsals, and therefore steel toe wouldn't have done any good. But oh well. So as you saw, the tractor did not fit. The friend we were borrowing this particular tractor from was obviously kind enough to let us borrow it. So I ended up returning it. I try and return things better than I get them, or at the very least in the same condition. And the emergency brake, the disconnect brake cable had corroded and snapped on his, so I have some airline cable and some loops and connectors, so I went ahead and just made him a new one and threw that on there. Now I'm throwing up some numbers here. So the total weight of that tractor, the front loader, the backhoe, and the trailer comes in right around 9,800 pounds. So I'm going to throw in some other numbers here. And these numbers don't match up. So it's actually kind of a blessing in disguise that the tractor didn't fit in that scenario, because that would have been a pretty noticeable overloading of this particular truck. So we have to figure something else out. We do have the friend that has that trailer actually does have a fifth wheel, and if we can work scheduling out, he said he's willing to help us with that and bring his fifth wheel over, and then we can do that. It'll hold up to 30,000 pounds, so we're good there. But that was actually a pretty big deciding moment, realizing that not only was the tractor too big for that trailer, but the weight combination was going to be too big. Even the F250 that I have would be maxed out with that particular load. So we're trying to figure out what we want to do. We bought the F250 from a friend, like I mentioned in the previous video, knowing that it needed a new transmission, and at the time, F250s are ridiculously overpriced right now. 350s are even worse, or at least when we bought that. Oh God, it's been over a year now. The plan was after the wedding that we would work on getting the transmission fixed, but we figured for the price of the truck and the price of a new transmission, we'd be looking around $5,500 to $6,000 total for everything. And since the cheapest F250 that I could find anywhere was 15 grand, at the time, that seemed like a good deal. I have since started looking just for curiosity's sake, and I've actually found quite a few that are in the 20 years newer than this particular truck, and don't necessarily have the mechanical issue to work on, that are actually around 6 to 8 grand. So we're not entirely sure that one will get fixed. It might become a trailer, to be honest. Don't know. We'll see. But anyway, especially since it's rated at only hauling 10,000 pounds, just with the transmission and gearing that it has. So who knows what the future holds, but it doesn't really involve owning 3 trucks. But we shall see. So the main purpose of this particular footage was working on the hay shed, and as you saw in the earlier footage, it was pretty overcast, and we're always in the springtime always up against a weather crunch. Everybody out here that does anything with hay is always in a weather crunch, and come springtime, that's like the two things on their mind is can I mow and bale and do the tedding and all of that stuff, and do I have days where I have to wait for rain to stop and then grass to dry. That's just the way it is being in the Pacific Northwest in the springtime. So we've had a few days, and we're expecting to get rain within the day of actually building this. So I'm expecting to get rain tomorrow in this footage. I set out with the goal to specifically get a roof built and get it to the point where it will hold hay, which was kind of fun because as I was building it, Emily was not entirely sure that the size was like, she felt like it was going to be too big. We didn't need it to be as big as it is, but she agreed that the size is actually fairly nice and convenient. We're trying to figure out at the moment if I've built this side a little too high, since Emily's the one that has to do most of the haying. We've learned that the grass out here is one of the things that I'm most allergic to, which is the only real downside to living here. One of our friends commented on a video that this year the allergies have been particularly bad for pretty much everybody, everywhere around here for some reason. I guess last year's challenge was fleas, and this year's challenge is allergies. We've had almost no fleas this year that we've had to fight with, and last year we could not get rid of them. It was so annoying. Oh man. But yeah, this year's been weird. We haven't seen more than one or two in a couple of days. So I don't know if the fact that I have been more actively mowing the grass around us is helping, or if just the weather has been more normal for this area. The last couple years were super dry, and really hot actually. This year's been so nice. I mean, it's the middle of June, and we still find where we actually have to cuddle up under blankets, or there's even been a few nights we've ended up turning the heater on, which was the reason we moved out here, was to get the cooler summers. So I'm loving it. Emily's not entirely sold on it. She finds that she's a little chilly sometimes. So, but yeah, it's been good. So this particular side that I'm getting ready to put up right now, I went back and cut the top off of each of those studs, so it's about 4 inches shorter than the side closer to the camera, and that way it'll be more comfortable for Emily to work in it when if she needs to use the pitchfork to pull the hay out of the lower areas. One of the reasons, I don't remember if I mentioned this, but I plan on having several of these. That way, as we work through the spring, we can just have it ready wherever we are, and we can, when we're ready to, when we get it filled, I can pick it up and move it over to the rabbitry area, and we're good to go. Or if we end up with enough that we have one for chicken needs, we can set one there. Or when we get down the line and we have, we want to get some pigs at some point, and possibly even a cow or two and some horses, particularly Mustangs. But I don't know if all of that will come to fruition. We shall see. Particularly the Mustangs. That's going to be the hard one. I've wanted Mustangs since I was a kid, and they're gorgeous animals. I love Mustangs. I love their intelligence. I love their personalities. For all of them that I've ever been around, training them and breaking them in is probably something my body is no longer capable of doing. We shall see. You never know. But at the moment in the footage, we're discussing what to do about a roof, and we're discussing if we should do some form of door to help block weather. There's one of the videos that I like to watch, is Blacktail Studios, and in one of his recent videos he was talking about the extremely high amount of time that he does not put in his videos where he just sits and stares at his project. That's a pretty important thing, just thinking about what you're building, and especially with a project like this where I don't actually have a plan yet. I've got some ideas and I've got kind of a function that I want it to have, but as far as the actual layout of everything, it's just been winging it as I go. And so I'm trying to decide on the door window type device and the roof type structure, because I know I need it to overhang by a fair amount, or have some type of hinged cover that we can lift up, or something. I don't know. So I'm doing some math and drawing some things out and thinking, and I figured I'm still working, so might as well leave it in here. And Emily came over and we were trying to brainstorm, and right here is obviously the moment where I decided figured what I needed. So I decided that I'm going to try and just put some modified rafters, I guess is the way to do it. So, and I got the idea from my plans for the lumber pallets, because I've got a bunch of scrap 2x6s, and the plan was to build some form of simple curved, essentially rafter, that would sit on top of the top boards and allow the metal sheathing over the top to actually be at a curve, so that the straps will allow it to keep it as tight as possible as that lumber sits there and dries. And so I decided to try and use some of those boards in that way. To basically just create a big overhanging curved roof. However, to do that, I also have to build a fairly solid header, essentially. So I've got some 2x6s and 2x12s left over from building the bump out and the spare room, and so I went and grabbed some of those so that I could use them. And then it's just a matter of working out how to cut them and how to position everything. You can tell it's getting late in the afternoon because there's Kernigan. She keeps coming over to investigate. She hasn't started yelling at me yet to tell me that it's time to go in. So we're not quite to treat time, but we're getting close. And then there's Charlie. He's just all over the place. There are frequently times where we wonder if he was the right dog for our first dog, because he is way more energy than we want him to have. But he's been a good dog. We need to get some kind of herd for him. He does try to herd the chickens, and apparently for Emily he does a good job. For me, he just scatters them. So I don't know. But he does like to help Emily herd the chickens into their coop. Yeah, see, he lasted about 20 seconds before he decided he was done resting. So what I'm doing at the moment is cutting these to the length. So they're 8 foot. They'll be 8 foot long, and then I'm cutting a notch in the end to basically just to sit down on top of the side walls. And then I'll cut this long 2x6 to fit in between them across the top of the sidewalls, and these will kind of act as the double top plate, sort of, for the end walls, and then lock it in as a nice thick big header. I don't feel like it's going to take too much weight, just because of the size of the roof. Although if we did get snow here, then there would be a fair amount of snow sitting there until it melted, just because of the fact that to get the roof to bend, I'm going to put the roof panels sideways, so water will run off of them pretty well, but the snow would have a chance to kind of sit there. So we'll have to see how that goes, and future versions might get something different for the roof. depending on how this one ultimately performs. So far, it's kept most of the hay dry that we have in it as of today. But I did have to put some metal paneling around one side because the roof didn't overhang quite enough, and so some of the rain was hitting down towards the bottom. Oh, but I started to mention that earlier. Emily thought it was potentially bigger than it needed to be, and I thought it was funny that as we started to actually load up the small amount of hay that she had scythed already this year, it completely filled this, and we even climbed in it to try and smash it down and compact it as much as we could. So it's packed in there pretty good, and we definitely will need a few of them. And one of the advantages that presents is that as we're going through one of them, we will actually be able to work all the way to the bottom of it and then clean it out, so we don't have to worry about the potential for really old hay going moldy in the bottom or something like that. I don't actually want them too much bigger than they are, because hay fires is apparently a pretty big concern and a very easy thing. I had never actually heard about that until we were out here, and that was one of the challenges that you have in not having more than a couple of days at a time to potentially let that hay dry before you bale it. If it's still damp, then it starts to mold and decompose, and as it does so, it actually releases some gases that are extremely flammable, and it creates enough heat that the combination can actually spontaneously combust. And I've actually seen, I was in Utah actually though, where we saw a hay truck. I was driving down Sardine Canyon from Logan to Brigham City, and one of the bales had burst into flames, and I thought that was weird and couldn't figure out how the brakes had overheated that much or something. And I've learned since that no, it was probably that giant 1,000-pound bale of hay just was slightly too damp when they actually baled it. It's pretty crazy. So what I'm doing now, I wanted to make sure that since this 2x12 is acting as a big giant header, I wanted to make sure that it had a good solid connection to the ground. So I'm creating a very tightly cut. It's not quite a 3x3, but it's close. But I'm taking that down to or cutting it down so that I have to intentionally, pound it in to make sure that it's nice and tight, and there's no gap there. That way the entire header is supported on basically a much larger post, so it'll be good and solid. And I decided I needed a couple more of these scrap 2x6s. These were actually essentially waste cuts to be able to get one of the lengths that I needed for, I believe, the rafters. I took one of the logs and cut it down to where I could get a 12-foot piece, and then I was left with like a little 4.5 foot chunk of the log, and I went ahead and just milled it up as 2x6s. And these I've found several uses for them, and I've probably got about 24 of these out of that one log. It was one of the bigger logs, one of the thicker logs. So I'm marking them out to basically just get a rough taper. So I think I put like 5 inches high from the, for the top of the board at the very center, and then angled down to 4 inches, about 12 inches away from center, and then 2 inches at the very end of the board, and then just cut, straight lines. But that way there's several, basically creates a gambrel style roof, technically, I think is what it's called, or gable. I always get the two mixed up. A gable roof is where it's just the two, right? So a gambrel roof is, yes. Gambrel roof is where you have several different angles, basically listed as having 2 slopes on each side. It's your typical barn, basically. So I put the one upside down, kind of hoping that it would show on camera well enough that you could actually see the different angles. And looks like it was actually pretty stable. It stayed there while I kept cutting. And then it's just a matter of getting all of these. And that one didn't, the blade didn't like that. It almost had some kickback there. So I tried turning this one around to make that easier. And then I decided I'd make it a little easy on myself, and these are 46 inches and it's 42 inches deep, so I went ahead and just marked 2 inches in from the one end, and then marked on the header board where it needed to go, and they went up pretty quick. We're getting pretty close to the end of the footage for the day, which is good, because about now my foot started to really kill me. I'm glad I didn't stop working, since it didn't break anything. The best thing I can do is, walk it off. I have a different opinion on injuries than a lot of the traditional opinions. The whole RICE idea, rest, ice, compression, and elevation, is essentially designed for pain management, not for healing. And when I have an injury, I would much rather focus on healing than pain management. And that's not to say I'm, a masochist or anything. I just will tolerate pain as much as I can. Like, for instance, I hate taking pain meds. I will take them when I need to, but I hate taking them. They wipe me out. They make me dizzy. They make me nauseous. I don't see how, I can't function on them. And they don't really take away the pain. They make it tolerable. They dull the edge, so to speak. I don't see how people, and don't get me wrong. I'm not saying this to be judgmental at all, but I don't see how people can become addicted to them, because I can't stand them. They seriously drive me nuts. I can't wait to stop taking them when I do have an injury that's bad enough to take them. So I actually use a heating pad whenever I get injured, and try to move the joint or muscle as much as possible to get the blood flow, because the blood is what does the healing, and if you decrease the blood flow to manage pain, then it actually takes longer to heal. And there are some doctors that are agreeing with that and touting that. My physical therapist, when I was in the car wreck a few years ago, had a few different ideas, and his were a little more extreme than mine, actually. But anyway, so yeah, I try and walk things off as much as I can, unless there's, like I said, unless there's a fear of something broken, then obviously you can't walk that off. But I have sprained or twisted or, damaged pretty much every joint in my body at some point over my life. I'm kind of a klutz, actually. I don't know if you caught that a few minutes ago in the video, where I actually dropped the sheet metal on my head. You might want to go back a few minutes and review if you enjoy that kind of a thing. I'd put the one screw up and was moving the ladder over to get the other side, and I thought this was interesting that there's enough light that I can see, and the camera picks up enough light to be able to see, but the GoPro doesn't. So it's interesting to see that, like, how dark it is in this footage really wasn't as dark as it is. But this is the image with the flash, so you can kind of see where I ended up, and it literally, we got this finished just in time. So the next video will be filling this, and then later that night is when it started to rain, so we got it done just in time. But that's where we'll call it for today, because that's where I ended up finishing off. So thank you as always for watching. God bless you and yours. Stay safe out there.